Record to the cloud. Okay. Okay, participants. Okay. Give it a few seconds for some attendees. Excuse me. Oh. Here we go. The rule of Zoom seems to be, some people have been saying that you start a little bit late because people, generally don't necessarily come in at exactly the right, the main hour. Yeah, welcome everybody. I know there will be more people trickling in as it goes on, but welcome to Syosset Public Virtual Library's Author Lunch Series. Today we have a wonderful author with us, and I am going to allow my colleague Evelyn to introduce her in a second. I just want to let everybody know a few housekeeping rules, I guess. Just hold your questions for a little bit. We will definitely be doing Q&A with the audience. You can do Q&A either through the chat or the actual Q&A. Evelyn and myself will read the questions to Kimberly, who will answer them. And just keep it friendly, keep it nice. We're all here to have a good time and have something special for lunch. have a little special guest with us for lunch going into our holiday weekend. So without any further ado, Evelyn, would you like to take it away?
Sure. With us today, we have the wonderful author, Kimberly McCreight. Her book, Reconstructing Amelia, was a very popular book. It was nominated for an Edgar Award. Now her newest book that is out, came out in April, I believe. It's called A Good Marriage. Also a fabulous turning, twisting thriller that I absolutely loved. It actually takes place this weekend. If you're gonna read the book this weekend, it is the perfect weekend to read it because it takes place July 4th weekend. So it fits perfectly with the time. So I'd like to introduce everybody to Kimberly McCreight with the book, A Good Marriage.
Hi, yes, so thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
And it's very fun to be here, as you said, this weekend, because it does line up with my book, and actually lines up with this year in my book, because this, of course, today is the holiday, the July 4th holiday, which actually plays a role, the Friday being the holiday, which doesn't always happen, plays a role in my book. So it's especially fun to be here today, and I hope everyone has good, safe 4th of July plans on the schedule. Yeah, so A Good Marriage is set in Park Slope, Brooklyn. It takes place over 1 week in the summer when most of the kids are gone at sleepaway camp and their parents are gearing up for the event of the summer, which is an adults-only party with a sexually adventurous side. Sexually adventurous but fun. Every year it's always meant just in good fun, but this year, after the party, a woman ends up dead. Her husband is quickly accused, and he reaches out to a former law school classmate named Lizzie for help. Lizzie is an outsider to Park Slope, and as she's drawn into the neighborhood, she quickly realizes that neither her friend nor his wife were who they appeared to be, but then maybe neither is her own husband. So the book is very much part domestic suspense, part legal thriller, but it's also meant to be a genuine exploration of what it means to sustain a marriage over time, and the secrets some couples keep and the compromises they make in order to stay together, whatever the cost. So that is a little bit of my elevator pitch about the book. It is structured it has two main narrative points of view. One is Lizzie, who is the outsider who's called in by her friend Zach to help defend him, and that is told in the present, after the crime has happened. And when the book opens, his wife is already dead, and her name is Amanda, and half the book is narrated from her point of view, and in the days leading up to her death. And there are also grand jury testimony and some other elements sprinkled through which help tell the story. So it's kind of an orchestral way of telling a story. And in fact, this is the way I have written all my adult thrillers. So my first book was Reconstructing Amelia. My second was Where They Found Her. And then I also have the young adult trilogy, which was a bit different in how the stories were structured. But I always write in kind of multiple time frames, and I'm working on a new book now, and it's the same thing, multiple narrators, multiple time frames. I think it's really the only way I know how to tell a story. But what's interesting about it is that I don't outline my mysteries in advance, and they are mysteries. I think they're also kind of domestic dramas at the same time. I care most about that. And when I sit down to write a book, the first thing I do is really have a question in mind. In the case of A Good Marriage, it was literally, what makes a good marriage? What is a good marriage? What are kind of some of the golden rules we all live by, we all believe in, like how true are they? Because I think there's a parallel in the book set up between the institution of marriage and how it's often perceived to be very black and white. Like, you should be best friends, you should always be honest with your spouse. There's a lot of shoulds that kind of say, and fidelity. The book obviously plays with the idea of fidelity because there is this party with partner swapping going on. But that is really an all or nothing thing in marriage. And so I wanted to look at those ideas and ask, the question really, how true are they? And are they true for everyone? And are they necessary? Are they sufficient? What does it mean? So when I sat down to write, I really just had that question in mind first and foremost. And then I come up with my characters and the basic structure. So I knew that Lizzie would kind of be our guide in, but that you would also get Amanda's point of view. I do like to balance kind of some present investigation with the really of what happened, that you can see unfolding at the same time. I think it gives you an interesting way into the story. But once I have that basic structure and kind of what narrative, is it going to be first person? Is it going to be third person? I just really start to write, and I write my way into the story. I do generally have some sense broadly of the whodunit, or at least who didn't do it usually, based on the characters I have at the outset. And then I just write a draft. And there are kind of writers who split into two groups. They either outline or they're pantsers, right? So,
right. Okay.
Yeah,
so I'm a pantser for sure.
Could you, what does that mean, a pantser, if you don't mind? This is my first time hearing that phrase. That's so cool.
Yeah, it's fly by the seat of your pants.
Ooh, I like it.
It sounds a lot more fun than it is. I will be honest. Because
so the characters are basically telling you what to write. As you're writing about a character, you're writing from their point of view. I mean, they're telling you what to do.
Yeah, so you're in the scene, and I see everything very much like a movie when I'm writing it, which is, I've heard before my books are cinematic, but I feel like that's because that's how I see it. So I'm kind of watching it happen and then staying in that moment. But what that means when you're the reality of writing a book that way, I can tell you, because I was just writing my new book 5 minutes ago before I got on this. And you have time, you're like, why am I writing this? Like, what, where, I hope this fits later. And you have to realize that it's a good part of it might not fit, and that a lot of it's going to get cut. But the good news is you didn't just spend 3 months outlining it. So I feel like you basically, depending on what your method is, you have to accept either your work comes at the beginning and you're going to outline it and you're going to figure it out. Although I have to say most outliners, I don't think follow their outlines exactly anyway, but, or your work's going to be on the back end in revision, and that you're just going to rip the whole thing apart and throw a lot of it out and have to rewrite it. And so that is definitely what I accept when I'm doing it. And so I have to shut off that voice in my head that says, why am I doing this? Because I can't, inevitably what I just did, it'll be useful in some way. Often I'll find something in that scene that ultimately gets pulled out that needs to go somewhere else, or it needs to be threaded in a different way. But most times it's there in some form ultimately. But you really have to accept that your revision process is just a very brutal process, in which you're really rewriting the book again and again. I probably rewrote A Good Marriage 10 times.
Oh, wow.
Entire thing, every word.
Did you know who killed Amanda right from the start? I mean, did you go in knowing who the guilty party was, or you weren't sure? We weren't none of us reading it, we had no idea.
Yeah, no, I didn't myself.
Oh,
Like
wow.
I said,
That's
I
the
knew,
life of a pantser.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. See, now you got it, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I didn't know for sure. But again, thematically, I knew why she would, and I'm not going to avoid spoilers for anybody who hasn't read the book, but I knew why she died, kind of. If you look at the underlying reasons once you've read the book, like why that happened, I knew that part. But the actual mechanics of like who was there and exactly why, I didn't have that all worked out. And in fact, there were early points. So some of the red herrings, people are like, I thought it was so-and-so. And part of the reason why is because at that point I thought it was so-and-so.
Okay.
So you're feeling that the red herrings are kind of genuine.
Right.
I course corrected as I was going. And then of course, you can't just leave it that way. Again, if you're writing that way, you have to go back to the beginning and make the red herring make sense. Like I hope that most of the red herrings, like they ultimately loop together in a different way, just not the way you think. So that I have to add later once I realize where I'm going. But it is, yeah, so all the individual twists and turns and the threading of the various things happens later, most of it.
So that's a question about the twists. How do you make the twists believable, like surprising but believable? Because that's kind of always something when you're reading these thrillers, you're like, oh my God, when it happens. But it's good to, obviously if it comes out of, not even left field, like the dugout, you're just like, it doesn't work. So how do you make them surprising but believable?
Yeah, so that is the thing that drives me most crazy as a consumer of if I'm watching a movie or reading a book, and if they're like, the twist is such a shocker, and then you're like, yeah, because that person wasn't even in the book or in the thing. They come out of there's nothing that drives me. I can rant for hours after watching something, reading something. I'm like, you can't do that. I'm
still ranting about certain things. Right, I'm still like that twist. No,
it's not a twist. That's just like, that's not a twist. So the way I want to feel and the way I hope people feel when they read my books is like, crap, I didn't know that, but I could have known that. Right. If I had been paying more attention. And then If you go back, and it's funny, I was on a recent one, like a book club discussion, and somebody was asking me a very detailed question about how so-and-so would have known, like whatever detail. And in fact, I had put in how they would have known it. So I do want you to be able to go back and see all of it. But the trick is the reader has to not see it the first time. So it's hard. It's a very hard balance between giving enough information and but obscuring it. So people think they're learning about these things for another reason. So anyway, so yeah, so I think it's the way to make them believable and organic is to ground them in character, and really ask like, why would somebody do something really? And sometimes I can't come up with an answer, which means I have to back up and either change the character or change the twist or but you really do have to make sure that it feels like something that person would do. And I think when you lead with character, which again, not to put in a shout out for pantsers of the world, but if you lead with character and not with story, it delivers you there in an easier way, I think, because I'm grounded in that, not by, like, I'm not tied to an outcome. So I'm like, okay, well, that doesn't feel right, so I'll do this other thing.
Yeah, because you have to put together not just the who done it, but the why they done it. Like, it can't just be so-and-so did it. There needs to be a reason.
Yeah. And I think to me, that's actually the much more interesting part of every story is the why. And also that's a reason for kind of narrating things from this multiple points of view, because you find that the why is never a simple, straightforward answer, right? Like, it's always really complicated and grounded in our various points of view of the world. And so but to me, that a mystery is much more interesting in the why than the who.
Did you always want to be a writer, an author?
Well, I was a lawyer, which in this case was kind of critical. Like, I don't think I could have written this particular book without having been a lawyer. I was not a criminal lawyer. I was a big firm litigator, and I actually went to Penn Law like Lizzie. So a lot of the things I say about Penn were kind of that you don't have any criminal experience. Not many people are criminal lawyers. All that stuff is true. So I was an intern at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I had done some pro bono cases, but I didn't really know anything about criminal law. So I knew enough, but I actually didn't do my research first. Because for me, again, it's got to lead with character and all that other stuff. So like I get all that stuff sorted out first, and then I figure I'll go back and change it. I'm going to have to change so much stuff anyway, as we've already covered. So I'll fit it in. So after I had the story basically worked out, and I knew enough about the law to know that like the book doesn't involve a big trial. Like I knew I didn't want to write that book, but I also knew like the time-wise that wouldn't make sense because that takes years to happen. So I knew that, okay, we could be dealing with the time up to arraignment, which means I wanted him in Rikers. And so like, why is he in Rikers? Like he wouldn't, somebody with his money wouldn't be held in Rikers ordinarily under the circumstances. So I had to figure that out. But I ended up shadowing a criminal defense attorney who was so generous with his time. And he actually lives on Long Island.
Okay.
He's a very kind person. So he let me, he answered all my questions because I had questions that everyone has, which is like, do you really not ask your client if they're guilty? I mean,
right.
like, is that true?
Did you go to Rikers?
I did go to Rikers, yeah. I went with him and I was able to go. I don't think I could have written with that kind of detail about it. And some things are just so far afield from your own experience that I personally feel like a fraud writing about them. So as soon as I knew I wanted the scenes at Rikers, I tried all these different ways to get into Rikers, which sounds really strange, but
you could have just committed a crime.
I could have. I was like, could I just go and pretend I'm visiting somebody? I was like, that seems like a bad idea to pretend to go to Rikers.
Undercover.
I want to just address the audience really quickly. If you have any questions for Kimberly, please feel free to put them in the Q&A and the chat, and Evelyn and myself will address them. But just continue on. So you visited Rikers.
Yeah, so I visited Rikers, and that was an experience. But it enabled me for sure to write about it with some authenticity. Which was great. And he also like let me go to hearings with him and do all that stuff. And he read the book afterwards. And I also had a prosecutor read the book afterwards. And I had lots of other experts. I had a homicide detective and a fingerprint expert. And I had to change a fair amount of things based on their wisdom, just things that weren't accurate about the forensics and stuff like that. Like I can remember with the fingerprint expert, I was like, I had something matching at some point, like 98%. And he was like, yeah, no, like fingerprints match or they don't match. That's DNA. Like there's no percentage with fingerprints, but it's funny what you don't know, and it, so I ended up having to use that a lot. So yeah, so I wasn't, I did not start out a writer. So I started out a lawyer, and then I took a leave of absence from being a lawyer to try to write my first book. And I did, in that 1 year, wrote a book and got an agent and got close to selling it. But I didn't sell it, so I had to go back to work. And I ended up writing another book while working. I would write it in the morning between like 4 a.m. and 7 a.m. and then go and work as a lawyer, like 90-hour weeks.
That's exhausting.
Yeah, it was not the best way to write a book. But I had gotten, while I didn't sell that first book, I'd gotten a lot of encouraging rejections, which is actually something you end up living off of when you're a writer. And so my agent at the time was very convinced that if I just wrote another book, he's like, just write another book, you'll sell that one. So I, did what he said. And then when I handed it to him, he said that the book was not only sellable, but unsalvageable. So yeah, it was pretty brutal. So I ended up at that point realizing that it just wasn't going to be as easy as I thought it was going to be. I kind of thought, based on that first experience, I thought, well, I got so close, I'll get close next time. But, it's really hard to sell a book, which is why I wasn't a writer to begin with. It involves luck. It really does. I mean, a lot of fantastic authors never sell their books. So, that was something I was aware of. But I ended up giving myself a 10-year deadline then, and ended up quitting practice of law. I had some kids in that time, but it took a decade, and it took, I think Amelia was my 5th book that I wrote. And I was on my 3rd agent at that point. And so until I sold Amelia, and then that was a two book deal. And so that was in 2013. And so this is my 6th book since 2013. So there've been a lot in a relatively short period of time.
Good for you.
So what was the inspiration behind A Good Marriage? Because that's a really interesting premise.
Yeah, it really was the question of what makes a good marriage. I have been married 18 years myself. And so the people around me have been married, about the same amount of time. And I find myself, every marriage is very mysterious. It really is. I don't think you can have any sense, no matter how close you are. Like, I have very close friends. I still can't tell you really what it's like inside their marriage. And even if they share, even if they're honest, which is a piece about the book, it's, I think a lot of mysteries have been written about the secrets a husband keeps from a wife, but not as many about the secrets couples keep from the world, particularly not like the secrets like they're murdering people, but secrets like, that they don't realize necessarily that they're keeping themselves.
We do have an audience question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
An anonymous attendee would like to know what advice you would have for aspiring novelists. And it sounds like you have a lot, so I'm curious to hear the question.
So my biggest piece of advice is to get a critique group of some kind, because you need feedback. So after I kind of wrote those 2 books in a bubble, really, because part of the thing is, if you want to be a novelist, like, there's really no way to be a novelist but to just write a book. And that is true. You just really need to do it. But as you're doing it, I signed up for writing classes because I had never taken any. I wasn't like a writing major in college or anything like that. And they offer them at a lot of universities. So I was in Seattle at the time, and they offered them at the University of Washington. And they're usually taught by novelists, which is helpful to get their feedback. But it's really helpful to get the feedback of a group, because you really need to hear what you're writing, how it lands with an audience, to understand what it is you're doing, not just what you're doing wrong, but even just what you're doing. Because I think part of becoming a novelist and learning the craft is to figure out how to write a novel and how to write your novel, the kind of novel you write. At least I know that's what I was doing, because my first 4 books, I think I chose to believe that they were more literary, but really they weren't. They just were my books without the mystery really being resolved.
Which brings us to a really good segue to the next question. Another anonymous attendee would like to know, how did you choose what genre to write in? Which I think fits perfectly with your answer.
It does. I feel like I have a question back for your audience, which is, why is everyone anonymous?
Yeah, that's one of the things that is very interesting. We can see people who use their names, but then, it's difficult for statistics because if it's an anonymous attendee, we're not exactly sure how many people we're reaching, but it's a bit of a mystery, isn't it?
It's a mystery. I find this very mysterious. I also anonymous audience members. Sorry, can you repeat the question?
The question is, how did you decide what genre to write in?
Yes. So I did not decide on a genre before I wrote anything. As I said, I thought my books were more literary. And it was funny, I was nominated for the Edgar Award with Amelia, which is a mystery. It's like the mystery writing award for a debut novel. And I didn't win, spoiler. But I remember at the dinner, my agent at the time turned to me and she was like, well, we didn't think you were writing a mystery anyway, which was true. When I wrote Reconstructing Amelia, I cared most about the relationship between the mother and the daughter. Amelia's a book about, it's told from the perspective of a daughter who appears to have gone off the roof, or did go off the roof of her private school in an apparent suicide, but the mother doesn't believe that's what happened. And the book involves cyberbullying and a lot of other things, but it to me was grounded most in that relationship. I was like, had very young daughters at the time, and I was like, how are we going to survive this? And they're older now, and I can tell you, I don't know. Still don't really know. But so I cared most about that. But I do care about the why, like the why things happen. And I just gravitate towards that kind of puzzle of a story. So it became a bit of a mystery. Because I do think the answers to these questions about relationships are really mysterious. So I think that's how I ended up there. But my books really land in between genres. And they are now definitely sold and I think shelved as mysteries. Although I think like in a Barnes & Noble, they're just in fiction. But
we do not have them shelved as mysteries. We have them in the general fiction. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So it's funny because sometimes people put a mystery, usually it's just fiction, but
yeah,
because they definitely have that relationship component, and they are a bit slower than some mysteries, meaning there's character development.
Right.
And I think for some readers who expect to be able to, some readers read very fast with mysteries, especially, and you can't really do that with my books. Yeah. It's hard because there's a lot of information buried in it. And so the pacing is different than a typical mystery. So my recommendation if when I fold the two questions together, which is like my advice for writers and for the genre question, is not to worry too much about it. Because the marketplace, like you guys, like librarians tell you what your book is. I mean, I'm like, oh, okay, so it's fiction, like or bookstore owners do. Or your publisher does. Like you don't really, and ultimately, in the end of the day, readers do, because the readers that are the right people for your book find your book, and that really ends up determining it. But it's not a question to really worry about. The first person who will help you with that will be an agent someday. If you're
okay. We have another question, and I'm going to read that one out. That one came from Christina. Do you join a group? Do you join a group when you have first started the novel or after a first draft? Also, how do you decide whether to apply certain feedback or not?
That's a good question. So I think you join a writer's group right away. Usually, and you can find, again, my point about the classes was actually writing groups often spring out of those classes because the people in them are all people that are, working and want to get more feedback. So my first writers group actually came from a group like that, but you can find them in all sorts of communities, often on parenting listservs, what have you. But I wouldn't necessarily wait to get feedback on sections of it. Although, if you know, let me back up. If you know for sure you are writing a book and you're like, I know this is going to be a novel. I know what I'm doing. If you really envision that, you might want to wait till you have a full draft, at least beginning to end. I will say that I don't let anybody get involved in reading anything of mine until I at least have a draft pinned down, because it's just too confusing to me, because I know where I'm going, and because the first drafts are such a mess that if I had somebody in there kind of weighing in on something that was half formed, it would be very confusing, and then I would have their ideas mixed with my ideas. So I do think at least if you have a draft down, you have some sense of what your ending is and what you're trying to do, and then I think you can get feedback. But that's if you know you're writing a novel and that's your goal and you know you're going to try to sell it. I think that when I was talking about getting a group early on, it's kind of when you're learning how to become a writer. And part of that might be writing short stories at first, because they're shorter. So it's easier to do that and to try to get feedback on them, because some of the craft of writing is in structure with a novel, right? Like in those bigger questions, but some of it is on a line by line basis. Like how do you capture voice? And that some of that can be perfected in a short story setting. So I wouldn't shy away from from learning how to write short stories, even if that isn't your thing, because it's definitely not my thing. But some of the best education I got in writing was from those classes. And you can also learn a lot from books. There's some great books on writing. Stephen King's On Writing book is great. And John Gardner's On Becoming a Novelist and his Art of Fiction book are both really good. And Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird. You can get pretty far reading those books. But I do think once you have something, I do think that you need feedback. And ideally, the person had the question about what to reject. That's the reason for having a group rather than one person. Because if you're crowdsourcing it basically. And if you have a group of 10 people and 9 people tell you chapter 1 is super boring, it's probably boring. I hate to break it to you, but it's unlikely that 9 out of 10 people think it's crappy and it's awesome.
Right.
But if it's 50-50, you should be like, well, I don't know. And what you really need to listen to is what people say about their emotional reaction to what they read. Do not listen to what they say about how to fix it, because invariably people are wrong about that. And I mean, even experienced people like editors and other people, because sometimes you have to get beneath what is bothering somebody, and then figure out, understanding that, figure out how to fix it in the context of your own work. Because you know your story best. And sometimes the fix is not where people think the fix is. Like they have an issue with the ending. Well, really, if you set it up better, that ending would work. And so you have to, now their feedback that the ending didn't work is what matters. Like they didn't resonate for them. It wasn't surprising. But sometimes the fix lies elsewhere in the book. So you do have to be very cautious about just listening to what people say. I will say I had a writing teacher, one of those people in Seattle, some class I took, said that if I continued to do, and I can't even remember what I was doing at the time, but if I continued to do that, I should quit writing because I was never going to get anywhere. Yeah. So
did you send the teacher your book? And the fact that you got an Edgar nomination?
No, I have not.
I will do it for you because
okay. All right. I'll trust you to send it on to her. Yeah. So my point is, like, you just have to be careful and protect yourself in writers groups too. Like giving good feedback notes is an art. And people should always lead with something positive because there's always something positive to say. And if people are making you just like feel bad, I would question that process. Getting criticism never feels good, but it should be productive. So you don't only want people who say how great you are. Like, don't have like your best friend read it who just thinks you're just awesome and will only say you're awesome. I mean, sometimes you need that person, but like most of the time you need somebody who's going to be honest but productive in what they say. But it is hard if people aren't experienced writers. You can get feedback from just readers, but the art of giving notes, it is an art form.
Okay, I have a question. Knowing that you base the book in Park Slope and live in Park Slope, that seems to be a hotbed for authors. Do you have your group right there in Park Slope? Do you have a bunch of authors that you hang out with in that area?
I mean, there are more authors in my zip code than there are apparently anywhere else in the country.
Right.
So yeah, no, there's so many authors. And the funny thing is when you live here, they're not only authors, novelists, but there's also journalists and there's like filmmakers and stuff. So it does take a little bit of the novelty out of it. Like when I'm like, my kids were like in a class, like 7 other parents would have books, you're like, oh, like, yeah, that's not special, yeah, so that changes the dynamic a little bit. And I work at the Brooklyn Writers Space where a lot of,
oh, you do?
Yeah. So there's a lot of authors I know through there. So, yeah, so I don't have a critique group anymore, just only because I don't have time, because the deadlines are too fast to have that space to work with to get feedback on something. Usually I'm relying on my agent and my editor most immediately to get that feedback. And so making sure that is a good relationship and that you work together well, it becomes even more important. For sure.
Christina has another question. She would like to know who some of your favorite authors are.
Let's see, who are my favorite authors? In my space, I think Gillian Flynn is like the gold standard. I think Gone Girl is one of my favorite books of all time, and I think that she does an incredible job balancing character and mystery. I really love Laura Lippman and Megan Abbott, and I think they're fantastic. Donna Tartt, I think is incredible. One of my favorite books of all times is The Hours by Michael Cunningham, which really, for me, some of the inspiration of my structure came from books like The Hours or The House of Sand and Fog. So those are not mysteries, but they created a suspense really through shifting points of view, just shifting time frames and shifting points of view.
So am I to understand that your A Good Marriage is in development for a movie by Nicole Kidman's Blossom Company?
Yes. So it's in development to be a TV series at Amazon.
That's even better because they can get every detail in it as opposed to leaving them out in a movie. So
we literally just had a conversation with another author recently about just this renaissance of movies being developed into TV series and how well the format works for books.
Yeah, it really does. It's always surprising when you think about books being able to be adapted into movies, right? Like just because there's so much, and the TV series really allows that the space. I mean, a novel and a series kind of fit, right? It really makes sense. So I feel like there is no better time to be a novelist with things getting adapted, because also there's so many platforms, there's so many different ways to do it. The limited series, you can come back from multiple seasons. So that's really exciting. So it's the same. Blossom also is developing Reconstructing Amelia. So at HBO, not Amazon. So that is, exciting. It takes a long time for things to happen and get made. And it's hard to make things. I mean, you hear about so many things get optioned, and then you're like, where is that thing that I'm like waiting for to see? But it's shockingly hard to get things made. I feel like the perception sometimes is like the people aren't working on it or they're not trying. And the reality is it's just translating something like, unlike a book where it's just you and your computer, there's like so many moving parts with television. But David Farr is adapting it, and he wrote The Night Manager and Hannah, which is just starting season 2, I think today.
It's very good. That was a movie first, I think.
Yes,
Hannah.
yeah.
I can't recall if it had a book before, but it was a movie first, and now it's just this powerhouse of a TV series.
Yeah. So it's, I do think it's like just season 2, I think it's like today or yesterday or something, just launched on Amazon. So so it's the same writer, and he's working on it, and I'm just really excited. I mean, it's very thrilling when you feel like your book is in hands that you can just trust, because otherwise then you are nervous about what's going to, then you're trying to get in the details of like what's happening, which I feel like is not a good situation to be in because it's going to be different, right? Like there's no way it could possibly be the same. And so I think it's great if you just have confidence in the overall vision, and then you can just kind of be at peace with that.
I hope they're going to keep it in Park Slope, though. They're not going to move sometimes they even change the place.
No, they do sometimes change the location.
Yeah.
I'm sure somebody will break that to me very, very gently, which is, I'm sure, possible. But of course, to me, the location is, it's not that I think only these things happen here, but for sure the neighborhood is a bit of a character.
Absolutely. Are the characters in the neighborhood, are they based on anybody that you know?
Not, yes and no, I would say is the answer to that. Like there's Maeve, who's, Maud. What's funny is Maeve is a character in what I'm writing right now, who's
okay.
I should clearly change because it's almost exactly the same as Maud. Anyway, so Maud is based on somebody, and she's actually the host of this party. So she's based on somebody who, and like the husband who's again, it is weird to think, to me, they're based on them, because I'm sure if those people read them, they would not, because they're not, none of the details fit. But the essence of the two people remind me of these people, and I do not think that they host that party. So I'm not necessarily going to run and tell her, and it's meant to be a compliment. Like, there's just something about, like, Maud, it's just like very cool and in peace with herself that this woman makes me think of that. But so it's in that way, right? Like, so the details are never exactly the same. The character of Victoria is the only one who's a direct lift from my life. She's my best friend from law school. And I just lifted her because she's like Lizzie's best friend in the book. And
Right.
I didn't have a lot of space to make her real. So it was like, I'm just going to make her real. Just make her, I'm going to pretend this is exactly what Victoria would say if I called her and said these things. And that was so, and it's also fun. She's my entertainment lawyer. She's negotiated all my film deals. So it was also just a little little shout out to her.
Little thank you, giving her a little credit in the book.
Once again, if the audience has any questions, we have a little over 15 minutes left, so please feel free to address them in the Q&A or the chat, and Evelyn and I will address them to Kimberly. In the meantime, I have a really quick question, or maybe not so quick. So you wrote YA as well. Now, did you intend to write YA, or was it one of those situations where, because I've heard from many authors that they were writing a book as an adult book, but the publisher would be like, this seems more YA, or did you, this is a much longer question than I thought I was going to ask.
I understand, yeah.
Yeah.
Did I plan it in advance?
Did you?
It's a little bit, in between the two things you're suggesting, because you're right, that does happen a lot, and you can see it's just kind of goes back to the genre question, right? Like, it's a little bit determined when you bring your book to a point of sale and an editor, or even which editors your agent approaches, right? Because that's the first determination, because most editors, YA is definitely separate from adult. Like, that's usually a separate imprint and totally different. So they're only going to approach YA editors with that. So I wasn't sure. Actually, at one point with Amelia, before I sold it, there was a suggestion that I make that YA. And one of the hallmarks of YA is, I'm no expert, but I have been told that it has no adult narrator. So Amelia, I would have had to pull out the mother and make it from the perspective of somebody else, the other point of view. And it just was clear to me that wasn't right, that book was about motherhood. And so that didn't seem right to me. For this, for The Outliers, I had an idea for the story, and I knew there wasn't going to be, it would only be a teen narrator. And so it just seemed like it was probably YA, and also it in my mind was 3 books, like, and that also feels like YA, right? Like a trilogy feels like YA. So I think that we were like, but I do think you're still responding to the marketplace. It's like my agent at the time went to sell it, and I think had she gotten feedback like this would be better as an adult book, although again that would be highly unlikely. I think you're more likely to get pushed the other direction, like, because there are adult books that have teen or younger narrators, even child narrators, right? That still end up being adult books. So I think you're more likely to get pushed in the other direction. If you start in YA, it's highly unlikely that they're going to say this is an adult book, even though it's got only teenagers in it. I mean, that's probably not going to be the case, especially because in the world of YA, you can write about pretty much anything you want to write about. So I didn't really sit down to do that, but it was clear pretty early on that it was going to be a YA book or books.
Do you, speaking of series, do you plan on revisiting characters in A Good Marriage, or?
Yeah, I would like to, I think I would like to write another book. That's not what I'm writing right now, and I'm glad that it's not, just because I think I found it hard with the YA books to stay in the world for book after book, one after another, just because you don't get a break. You don't get a break from it. So you're spending years in like one world, one set of characters. And I think that for me was a long time to be in that space. That's not what I'm writing now, but I definitely have an idea for a second book. And to me, the Good Marriage ends a bit at a beginning. And for Lizzie, I think she's kind of found herself. Certainly there's open questions about her marriage. I think that Wendy and Paul are really great characters. And to me, I'd want them to be more present in a future book. So we'll see. I think I'll wait to see what happens with my next book and where I am then, but it definitely is something I'm interested in doing. And I feel like I already know what I want to write about. So we'll see.
And even
so what's going on?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Evelyn. I was
going to ask the book you're writing now. Can you give us a little synopsis on what that's going to be about?
Yeah. So the book that I'm writing now is called Friends Like These. And it's about a group of Brooklyn hipsters that were friends from college. Now they're in their 30s, and they head upstate for the weekend to the Catskills.
Oh, that sounds great.
Yeah, so they kind of, once they're up there, they quickly run afoul of the locals, and they also have this kind of troubled history they're dealing with. So the question kind of becomes like, where is the real threat? Is it in that history, or is it in the environment that they're in? It is also about friendship. I mean, I think Amelia was about motherhood. This is about marriage, a good marriage, obviously. And this is really about friendship. I have a really close group of college friends. I went to Vassar, which is where my characters went. And I think that there's something really special about those kind of lifelong friendships.
Absolutely.
But there's also something like limited, like how well do you really know your friends? So anyway, so I'm excited about it, but I'm definitely like in the weeds. As I said, I'm at the place where I'm like, why am I writing this scene? But if my editor is watching,
Did you have to go up to the Catskills to research it, or have you been there before? Is it something you're familiar with?
Yeah, what's funny is a friend of mine from college, one of that friends from that group has a house up there.
Okay.
And it's this gorgeous, she's an architect, and she redid this, it's this like mansion that she like redid, and it's gorgeous. And there's this community of people that go up there on weekends. So they're all these like hipsters, like work at magazines, and they, whatever. But there's a lot of poverty up there, and like other issues. And so when I was up there, I was like, this seems a little not like the best idea, like just this combination of people. And so I had a really great time. Her house is gorgeous, and I love my friend, but I was like, this is a book. So it's funny, the house in it, which plays a bit of a role with the one friend has a weekend house, is her house. So I did warn her. I was like, this is your house, just so you know. But it's flattering, the description, at least in the book. So I think she'll like that.
I was going to say before, when Evelyn and I were playing verbal tug of war, it's great that you have ideas, just going back to A Good Marriage, for a sequel, especially since it's being adapted into a TV series, because there's season 2.
Right. Well, I mean, we'll see if anybody asks me. Yeah. Well, theoretically, yes, that could definitely be true. It would definitely come in handy, I think, for sure.
It's what do you have a favorite adaptation, or a few favorite books that have been adapted into TV series?
Well, I think they did. I not to be biased, because I was the same team of people, but I do think they did a fantastic job with Big Little Lies. And I actually, first of all, did not watch or read that until after my book was done, because there've been comparisons between my book and that. And that is one reason I don't spend a lot of time reading in my genre, because I feel like we end up all writing the same things. Like that's what zeitgeist is, right? Like, and I love that I know that I didn't read or watch that until after. And there's something like liberating about that. But I think that was a extraordinarily well done adaptation of something that it's very faithful, but also it changes things.
They did change the location, though.
Yeah, they did change the location. But they picked a good.
Yes, they picked a good location.
So yeah, but I think that things that were added were like subtle but perfect. So I really think that is a really good adaptation. I'm trying. I think the Hours was a really good adaptation of a really difficult book to adapt. I think about that movie and that book all the time. I just something about it to me was really it was really lyrical, I think. Yeah, so those are the only ones that are coming to mind at the moment. But I do think TV is such a good. I have not yet seen Little Fires Everywhere.
I've
we
heard
should watch it.
amazing things about
It's
it.
good. It's
Yeah.
very, I think it's very different from the book, but yet it was done very well and very enjoyable.
Yeah, it sounds to me like they added things from the book, but in a good, in a way that
Yeah.
great. I have heard. So I'm looking forward to watching that. And yeah. So now
What's your deadline for the book you're writing now?
soon. Super soon.
Okay.
September.
So you have no time for TV right now. You have
No
to
time
be
for
writing.
TV. Yeah, it's September 15th.
Oh wow, that'll be here before we know it.
Yes, believe me, yes.
So I'm sure it's been difficult though. You said you have young children. Have you been, well now the school's over, but before when you really should have been in the thick of it writing the book, you had your children home. So this pandemic has been a problem getting the writing done?
Yes, to be clear, they're not young anymore. They were young
okay.
when I wrote Amelia. So they're 16 and 13 now.
Okay, but they still have to go to school. They have to do school.
And that does not make them any less disruptive. Trust me.
Just a different kind of disruption.
It's a different kind of disruption. I could talk at length. But yeah, no, listen, it's been hard on everyone, right? I mean,
right.
I'm extremely lucky that I work at a job that I could continue to do and it didn't affect my income. And so that makes me among the very lucky ones. But yeah, look, I could complain for hours about how irritating it is to have people in my workspace when I'm not used to that. I could, well, we can offline, I'll complain at length about it, but it is difficult to write new material with people around for me because you do have to kind of get in a bit of a trance-like state. I do, at least, to create. So I wish I was at an editing stage, which would be easier. So yeah, but once the first draft is done, and they are, the Brooklyn Writer Space is opening back up slowly, I think. So,
oh, good.
Yeah,
good.
So I'll get to be able to go. And, the nice thing about going to an office too, when you're a writer, is it just creates a separation in your mind because it's hard enough to get, it's like having your own business or anything else. It's just, you don't have a lot of separation between work and life. So anything I can do to create those boundaries is helpful. Otherwise you're just thinking about it all the time.
Yeah, that's definitely a phenomenon of this time. I think with a lot of people working from home for the first time, they don't decompress, and I don't think that they always realize it. But
I think we even experienced that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, there's no off button. I know when we were working from home, Evelyn, we've spoken about that, right?
Right.
There's you
could be working 8, 9, 10, 11 o'clock at night still. It's just,
and you don't realize it.
Yeah, I really do think that happened to everybody. So I think during this period of time, because time has no meaning. Right? Like your home life is in your work life is in your home, and you just are doing things at all hours because you're also less efficient because everything is mixed together. So I do think for all of us, that's really been true, I think.
And you weren't going anywhere. You didn't have any plans. It was everything revolved around what you did at your home. So yeah.
Exactly.
Well, I hope the space opens up soon for you because I think we all need that little getaway.
Thank you.
We have a few minutes left. So any other audience participants, anonymous or otherwise, have any Q&A? We're not going to, we're not going to call you out, anonymous. If you want to be anonymous.
I scared off the anonymous people. Sorry, it was just.
we're all good, but please, like I said, if you have any more questions, put them in the chat or the Q&A. Do you, just kind of talking about adaptations, do you have any say in casting at all?
No.
Because I'm sure in your mind you have your dream casting.
What's funny is the book club kit that I have that goes with my book that my publisher made asks people to cast the thing. and it's so funny. People call, I don't know who anybody is. It's what's funny is I go to these, I'm like, who is that? I'm like Googling the people. I'm terrible. I'm terrible at that game. So I think the nice thing is there's actually a lot of characters. And I think characters that actually have some dimension to them. So there's like a lot of roles. And I really would be thrilled with like a whole range of people. And that's definitely something like I don't want to get my heart set on or attached to, because I feel like that's certainly something that could change at any time. I honestly would just be so excited to see it get made. And because I see it like a movie, to be able to share that experience with other people seeing it also with me would be a very cool thing.
I know Evelyn likes to cast
people.
Oh,
Evelyn, who would you cast?
Who would you
You know
cast?
what, I do, but my problem is so many of the people, I don't know all the new actors and actresses. And every week there's somebody new. So until it's really ready to be cast, it's kind of hard to say. I mean, I know the actors from the 80s and the 90s better than I do the ones now. So I think we have to wait a little bit on this one and see. There might be a great some new up-and-coming actors and actresses that would be great for the movie, the TV series.
You do have to wait until it's closed, that's for sure.
Well, we hope it gets made, because I also, when I read a book, I can picture it. Like I'm picturing Rikers. I will never go there, hopefully. So
let's hope.
It's not something that I ever plan on doing. So, I've seen it in other movies, but I'll look forward to seeing it in your TV series. And the beautiful houses in Park Slope and that wonderful, crazy party that happened that sets everything in motion. So.
Yes, that would be happening tonight if it were.
Yes.
Right.
Do you have a party to go to tonight, Kim?
No, no. For another year, I might, but not tonight. Everything here is still, the parties are not allowed here. So.
Okay.
Yeah, so
a Zoom party, maybe.
Exactly. Won't be quite the same somehow.
No.
It's not the same ring to it. Anyway, well, thank you guys so much for having me.
No, thank you. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much for speaking with us.
And thanks once again. I just want to let everybody know this will be available on the library's YouTube beginning Monday, and it will be available for 2 weeks. So if you have any friends, anonymous or otherwise, who would like to see this wonderful book talk, you could go to the Syosset Public Library's YouTube channel, and it will be up for viewing. Evelyn, would you like to sign us off then?
Sure. I just want to say one more thing to Kimberly. Perhaps next year you'll come, and instead of a virtual author visit, you'll come and you'll be our kickoff artist and author for our summer reading. Hopefully,
I would love that.
We have big plans for when social distancing is not the norm anymore. For when
we'd love to have you with the new book. It sounds wonderful. I love friendship books. I love reading about areas I've been to, because I have been to the Catskills. So I'm looking forward to your new book. But thank you so much for joining us, Kim. This has been wonderful, a virtual author visit.
Thank you so much. You guys have a great 4th of July weekend.
Thank you. You
as
too.
well.
Enjoy.
And to our audience as well.
Yes,
all right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.